I would suppose that that kind of an introduction would serve to temper the feeling that it wasn't sufficiently important for me to be at the Board of Trustees meeting in Salt Lake City today. Some time ago I read an interesting article by a man who is outstanding in the field of journalism. He was working for a firm which was wholly out of the line that he wanted to follow. He had started out to be a writer, and the usual experience for neophyte writers was to have his manuscripts returned with apologies. And in a state of frustration now, he sought counsel. He looked down the telephone book and he saw the name of a certain man, and without fully identifying the place or the full identity of the man, he went to the address, and shortly he found himself ushered into a palatial office and found that this was the president of one of the biggest concerns in the country. He was too frightened and it was too late to run, so he was ushered in by the secretary to talk with this man. He explained rather haltingly what his frustrations were. That's a word we overuse today. I don't know what frustration is, and I don't think the one that's frustrated knows what it is. And the man listened to him about how he was not getting on in the company where he was now working, and said, "How much do you work? How much do you make, son?" And he named a modest income, and he said, "Well, I think we can do a little better than that." But the boy said, "I don't want to come to work for your company because that's still a step further away from where I want to go. I want to be a journalist." So this kindly man of great experience said to him, "Son, it may surprise you at what I'm going to say. The thing you need to be a success is to have a few more failures. You haven't had enough failures. Now," he said, "you go back and dig out these manuscripts, and you turn a few of them into successes, and then you're on your way to success. That's the trouble with you. You haven't had enough failures." I've pondered that today, and as I come to you, one of the greatest congregations of youth that has ever been assembled and will ever be assembled, I guess, in our day, here at the Brigham Young University. I've been thinking of the tests through which the youth of the various generations of our day have been submitted. Going back into the early days of the church, we passed through a period of slander and misrepresentation, and we came through. It sort of drove us together because of the enemies from the outside, and we survived it. We passed through a period of mobbing and driving when lives were taken and blood was shed. And somehow the place of the martyr gave us strength. We passed through poverty. I suppose many of us here in this audience, if measured by today's standards, we would have been considered poor. We would have been on somebody's relief program because of the meager sustenance which in our childhood days, the passing down of the last generation's clothes, the making over of our rich city folks, cast-offs and made over by a skillful mother for our use. Some of us remember that we were somewhat of almost grown when we had what we used to call a button suit of clothes. And some of you will remember. We passed through poverty, and we gained strength from the poverty, of the test of poverty. Then we passed through an age of what we might call apostasy or betrayal from the inside. One of the severest things through which we passed. And then we've gone through another, or going through, maybe have gone through, a period of what we might call sophistication. I don't know what that word means either. But it generally means that there are so many confounded smart people that they're not willing to listen to the humble prophets of the Lord. And we've suffered from that, and it's a rather severe test through which we're passing. But today we're being tested and tried by another kind of test that I might call the test of gold. The test of plenty, affluence, ease, more than perhaps the youth of any generation have passed through the history, at least, of this church. And I'm wondering, as I sit now in the councils of men in various places, in this day of greatly expanded growth of college population, with tremendous costs. We're talking of federal education as a way to ease the costs of so-called higher education. Men in high places are asking the question, are our standards in college education too low? Or there are a lot of college students who are attending college who really want to excel? Or are they attending college just because it's the popular thing to do? And they really are not prepared to put their heart into it. Or are we making college education too easy for them? Or are we really expecting the kind of sacrifice that makes for strength as a result of this education? Now, those are some soul-searching questions, but you can be sure that men in high station who are thinkers are asking the very questions about us. And we must one time, who sit in such places, ask similar questions. With that in mind, then, this may sound to you to be a strange dissertation upon a few matters that might be said to be negative rather than positive in their approach. I shall take them as something for a text, and you'll know what I started out to try to say if I depart largely therefrom, and that's what a text is for anyway. Shakespeare, you remember, ended one of his great expressions when he said, "Sweet are the uses of adversity." And all through my life, since I was forced to memorize it to pass a certain course, I wondered how in the world the uses of adversity could be sweet. Which, like a toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. While I was back east this last month, I sat in on groups of businessmen in two of the great institutions back there, and there were three things that had excited the people back there and drawn their attention to the church. The first one was the possibility of George Romney as a political luminary, the American Motors president and the president of our Detroit stake. A lot of interest, favorable press about George Romney. The announcement of a new, they call it skyscraper. Some think we're going in the hotel business when they saw the pictures and the announcement of that big skyscraper up in Manhattan. And the third thing was the phenomenal successes of the BYU College Bowl. I noted that silence when I said that. As I sat around a luncheon table, and some of these had watched the performance of our students on the College Bowl, my, it's just wonderful, those students. What a great student body you must have to have such representatives. And I made a remark there that caused them to wonder, and it may cause you to wonder a little. I said probably it'll be the best thing for the BYU participants themselves if they lose one of these battles of wits. That may have sounded like disloyalty, but I'm not sure but what I was wholly right. What probably they needed more than anything else were a few more failures to make them the champions that they hoped one day to be heralded. I'd gone down to a conference down in Richfield, Utah some years ago, and early on Sunday morning I got a call from an anxious mother. She said, "This may not sound important to you, but my son is playing on the Richfield High School basketball team. They're all religious boys, they're members of the church, and they've been very devoted. And my son has said to them, 'Now, boys, let's be faithful in our attendance at Sunday school and sacrament meeting and priesthood meeting. Let's pay our tithing, let's have our prayers, so that we can win the basketball league.'" And so they went out and they had been successful. But last night, the Saturday night, they lost to the tail enders of the league. They were the champions. And they lost to the lowest ones on the totem pole. And then these boys said as they walked off the court, "Well, where did all the church going and praying get us anyway?" Now, she said, "Brother Lee, I wish you could say something because my son is kind of on the spot. I wish you'd say something." Well, the business of the morning sessions precluded any thinking about what I might say if I did say anything, until I got in the morning session of conference and I looked down at the first row, and here was the mother and the entire basketball team sitting right down in front of me. It was as much as to say, "Well, here we are now, what are you going to say about it?" Well, with a bit of guidance and a bit of inspiration, I sought to say something, the like of which I may say something about today, that probably their losses were some of the greatest gains they would have received from their basketball experience, and that out of failure, what had seemed to be failure had come in the world the greatest of all the successes. Now it's about that for a few moments that I should like to address myself. One of the greatest business leaders in America today, James F. Oates of the Equitable Life, said this about factors which he said were necessary to develop us into real eminence in any field. He said, "Whatever may be the nature of our work or the character of our own vocational activity, eminence always involves the following." Then he gave 4 things, and I want you to mark them. First, you must have the determination to excel. Second, you must have the willingness, now I want you to mark this, to pay the price, to study, to live through disappointments with optimism, and to accept the sacrifices necessary to succeed. Now, do you get the significance of that? Third, you must have the steadfast pursuit of purpose, doing the work day after day, week after week, yes, year after year, whether you feel like doing it or not. And finally, pride and faith in the virtue of your calling. That is to say, spiritual motivation. Great scientists verified the necessity for the process by which series of failures are ultimately turned into successes. Let me read you from a statement made by Dr. Edwin D. Starbuck, who was on this campus. I guess it was in 39 or 29, Brother Barrett. way back about that time, he said something, and I want you to listen to this, and an accompanying statement from Dr. Einstein. The scientist solves his problem, studies his problem, saturates his mind with it, puzzles over it, dreams about it, but seems to find progress impossible, blocked, as it were, by a black, impenetrable wall. And then at last, and suddenly, as if out of the nowhere, there comes a flash of light, the answer to his quest. His mind is now illumined by a great discovery. The professor was positive that no great discovery had ever been made by pure reasoning. Reason would lead to the borderline of the unknown, but could not tell what was within. And Dr. Einstein said this: after all, the work of a researching scientist germinates upon the soul of imagination or of vision. When I think and reflect how my discoveries originated and took form, 100 times you run, as it were, with your head against the wall. Now that meant 100 failures or more. In order to lay your hands upon and define and fit into a system what from a merely indefinable premonition you sense in vain. And then suddenly, perhaps like a stroke of lightning, the saving thought will come to you, and the indescribably laborious task of building up and expanding the system can begin. The process is no different by which the artist arrives at his conceptions. Real faith, either to a scientist or a businessman or a minister of religion, involves the problem and struggle of searching. Dr. Victor Hess, Nobel Prize winner, who was the discoverer of cosmic rays, said this: real faith for a scientist, as for anyone else, is often a matter of bitter struggle. The victory must be won, or the gift must be discovered, by each one in his own soul. It often takes the personal experience of grave danger of death to bring conviction and to prepare the way for faith in a divine providence. I want you to remember that. It oftentimes takes the personal experience of grave danger of death to bring conviction and prepare the way for faith in divine providence. What is certain is that when faith comes, there follows a great serenity of soul and a deep peace in the human heart. Dr. Alfred C. Lane of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences said this: I believe we should strive for faith that keeps one calm and brave in the face of dangers met in the path of duty. Such a faith should be like that which a good soldier has in a commander in which he has perfect confidence to bring him through. I believe that faith keeps one true in the dark and humble in the spotlight. But most important, I believe that faith works, brings hopes to fruition, and ideals to reality. Without faith, man is a cold creature, lost in the world of human progress. He has nothing to live for. He fears death. Fear distorts his outlook. He becomes but a human shell. Some of the greatest religious experiences have come out of some of the most terrifying experiences. Paul put this in summary, you remember, when he said of the Master, though he were the Son, meaning the Son of God, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Then he added, and being thus made perfect, he became the author of salvation unto all who would believe on him. He became the Son of God through suffering, in other words. He was probably remembering acutely his own spiritual victory after seeming defeat. He had set himself to a course of trying to destroy this thing called Christianity, when suddenly a blinding flash of light knocked him to the ground, and a voice spoke and said, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he answered feebly, Who is it, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. And then he added, It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, Paul, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And then the answer came back, Thou shalt go to one Ananias in the city of Damascus, the very one that Paul had letters to continue to persecute. Thou shalt go to Ananias, and he shall tell thee what thou shalt do. Now that was the last of the degradation of humility to which Paul was to be submitted. The Master's reference to his own adversities, he said to Joseph Smith, when in one of the lowest points of the prophet Joseph's suffering, O Lord, where art thou? How long will it be before thine eyes can see, and thine ears can hear the piteous cries of thy saints, and their wrongs be avenged upon the heads of their enemies? And the Lord, as though he'd taken a frightened child in his arms, said, My son, peace be to thy soul. Thy troubles be but of a small moment, and if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high, when all their lies shall fail. And then he said, And if thou should be cast into the pit, or into the hands of murderers, and the sentence of death be passed upon thee, if thou be cast into the deep, if the billowing surge conspire against thee, if fierce winds become thine enemy, if the heavens gather blackness, and all the elements combine to hedge up the way, and above all, if the very jaws of hell shall gape open that mouth wide after thee, know thou, my son, all these things shall give thee experience, and shall be for thy good. I guess it would be difficult in the midst of persecution and suffering to wonder what good is going to come out of all this kind of trial and suffering. In the terrifying experience of the Master on the Mount of Temptation, after those 40 days of fasting and those terrifying temptations of Satan, it says, and the angels came and ministered unto the Master. The first missionaries, you remember, who went to England were submitted to a terrifying experience. Just when the greatest harvest of this dispensation was about to be made, the four missionaries there in their sleeping quarters at Preston, England, witnessed for an hour and a half the marching parade of evil-looking devils who came, possessing every form and feature of men in the flesh, angry and desperate, cursing, profaning, threatening. They tell of the perspiration that they suffered and the extreme anguish. And finally the Lord delivered them, and when he got home, Heber C. Kimball said to the prophet, what was the matter of us that we had to be, what had we done that we had to be submitted to such experience? And Joseph surprised them when he answered, No, Heber, at that time you were nigh unto the Lord. There was a veil between you and him, but you could not look upon him. When I heard it, it gave me a great joy, for then I knew that the work of God had taken root in that land. It was this that caused the devil to make a struggle to kill you. Joseph then related some of his own experiences in many contests he'd had with the evil one, and said, the nearer a person approaches the Lord, the greater will be manifested by the adversary to prevent the accomplishment of his purpose. John Taylor, in connection with this, said, I heard the prophet Joseph Smith say to the 12, you will have all kinds of troubles and trials to pass through, And it is quite as necessary for you to be tried even as Abraham and other men of God. And said he, God will feel after you, and he will take hold of you and wrench your very heartstrings. And if you cannot stand, if you cannot stand it, you will not be fit for an inheritance in the celestial kingdom of God. As I've listened to every member of the 12 that's come in, they've related my experience. Within a week after my installation as a member of the 12, I listened to all who had preceded me, who were then living, relate their experience. And all were telling my story. It was put in language by one of the brethren who said, one thing that I have learned since I came into the council of the 12, and that is that there's a devil. That may surprise you, but it verifies the very point that's made here. There are those who have said, and we sing, yeah, how I would like to have been when Jesus put his hands and took the little ones into his arms. How I'd like to have been when he stood on the Mount of Olives and so on. And there are those who've said, how I'd like to have been there to have defended the prophet Joseph when he was going through his trials. To these who thus say, President Kimball said, there are many within hearing who would often wish that they could have been associated with the prophet. You imagine, said he, that you would have stood by him when persecution raged, and he was assailed by foes from within and without. You would have defended him and delighted to have shown your integrity in the days of mobs and traitors. Let me say to you that many of you will see the time when you will have all the trouble and trial and persecution that you can stand, and plenty of opportunities to show that you are true to God and to his work. The church has before it many close places through which it will have to pass before the work of God is crowned with victory. To meet the difficulties that are coming, it will be necessary for you to have a knowledge of the truth of this work for yourselves. The difficulties will be of such a character that the man or woman who does not possess this personal knowledge or witness will fail. If you have not got the testimony, live right and call upon the Lord, and cease not until you obtain it. If you do not, you will not stand. Remember these things, for many of you will come, for many of you will live to see them fulfilled. The time will come when no man or woman will be able to stand on borrowed light. Each of you will have to be guided with a light within himself. If you do not have it, how can you stand? Do you believe that? He asked. Adversity. The meeting with and the solving and against the things of the opposition. A mythical story of a wise man who went to visit King Solomon. After they'd visited for several days and this wise man was about to depart, King Solomon said, well, now surely you're not going to leave without leaving me some gem of thought to ponder after you're gone? Oh, said the man, what can I say to you, the wisest man in all the world? But King Solomon pressed him, and finally this man said, well, I might give you this to ponder. When everything is black and foreboding and the dangers are all around about you, retire to your secret chamber and thank God that this one day will pass. And when the sun is shining and everything is rosy and everything is lovely and going all right, then again, don't forget to retire to your private chamber and again say, thank God that this too will one day pass. Isn't that strange? To pray for adversity, to pray for struggle, to pray for adversity that you might be able to rise above it and be worthy of the place you have. Let me close by reading you two statements that must be familiar to you students of the Book of Mormon. Alma came upon a group of people who were mourning because they'd thrust them out of their synagogues because of their clothing wasn't good enough. And he said to them, well, blessed are you because you're thrust out, because you're compelled to be humble. Because you're compelled to be humble, blessed are ye. For a man sometimes, if he's compelled to be humble, seeketh repentance. And now surely whosoever repenteth shall find mercy. And he that findeth mercy and endureth the end, the same shall be saved. And then you'll remember in Helaman, and thus we can see how false, and also the unsteadiness of the hearts of the children of men. Yea, we can see that the Lord in His great infinite goodness does prosper and bless those who put their trust in Him. Yea, we see that at the very time when He doth prosper His people, yea, in the increase of their fields, their flocks and their herds, and in gold and in silver, and in all manner of precious things of every kind and art, sparing their lives, delivering them out of the hands of their enemies, softening the hearts of their enemies that they should not declare war against them. Yea, and in fine, doing all things for the welfare and happiness of His people. Yea, then is the time that they do harden their hearts, and do forget their Lord, their God, and do trample under their feet the Holy One. Yea, and this because of their ease, and their exceeding great prosperity. And thus we see that except the Lord doth chasten His people with many afflictions, yea, except He doth visit them with death and with terror, and with famine and with all manner of pestilence, they will not remember Him. Isn't that sad? Oh, how foolish, and how vain, and how evil, and how devilish, and how quick to do iniquity, and how slow to do good are the children of men. Yea, how quick to hearken unto the words of the evil one, and to set their hearts upon the vain things of the world. Yea, how quick to be lifted up in pride. Yea, how quick to boast, and do all manner of that which is iniquity. And how slow are they to remember the Lord their God, and to give ear to His counsels. Yea, how slow to walk in wisdom's path. Will you remember what I read from Dr. Lane? Faith is that which keeps you true in the dark and humble in the spotlight. The Master said, blessed are ye when men shall persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil falsely against you for my sake, for so persecuted they the prophets. But woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for so did they to the false prophets. James Russell Lowell caught the sentiment that I should like you to carry away from this brief dissertation. In his present crisis, one verse he says, then to side with truth is noble, when we share her wretched crust, ere her cause brings fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to the just. Then it is the brave man chooses, while the coward stands aside, doubting in his abject spirit, till his Lord is crucified, and the multitude make virtue of the faith they had denied. You Latter-day Saint youth, youth of the noble birthright, you whose parents have passed through the rigors of trial and testing, I ask you to consider now whether or not the trials through which you're passing today, you call it ease and luxury and perhaps too easy ways to learning and education. May you not forget that yours may be the most severe test of those of any age in our day. God grant we won't fail, and that we will so have the faith that we can keep true when we're in the dark, And when we're in the spotlight, that we shall not forget to be humble, for which I pray humbly in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.